And we've got another guy on the phone who is very, very popular. Paul Sinclair lives with his wife and family in the seaside town of Bridlington on the east coast of Yorkshire. He began his research into UFOs and other local anomalies in 2002 and created the ILF UFO website as a platform for witnesses to share their accounts and experiences. Paul is a thorough researcher who is not content with hearsay or rumours. He studies and investigates his subjects to the minutest detail, then seeks out witnesses and documented evidence to back up his work. And, more than that, he's on the phone now from his home in Bridlington. Hi, Paul.
Hello, and how's things? It's great to be speaking again, and thank you very much for inviting me back.
Absolutely my pleasure, Paul. How are you and the family?
We're all good. Like everyone else, I suppose, listening to this, getting ready for the overindulgence. We'll all be a few pounds heavier and, I don't know, a few brain cells less with alcohol, maybe.
Absolutely. Do you know, we're having a bit of a UFO night here tonight, Paul, rather than last year was all over the place with ghosts and cryptids and UFOs. This year it's, I'm going to say we've got serial killers and UFOs as the main thing. We've got some ghostly stuff too. I've got Tony Buck on in the next hour. I don't know if you know Tony. He's met you a couple of times.
I've met Tony, yeah. A lot of respect for Tony, and I hope... Well, I will. I'll stay and listen to that.
Well, he's sitting right next to me at the moment. If you want to throw some abuse at him, Tony, feel free.
Hello, Paul, and a Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you, Tony. Great to hear from you. Maybe see you at Hull later in the year.
Oh, yes, I shall be there.
Yeah,
excellent.
I was disappointed I couldn't make it up there in the summer, Paul, but I was hoping to get there. So, where are we? What's happening? Last time I spoke to you, around the Bempton area where you live, there were some mutilations of sheep going on.
That's correct. Well, and it hasn't really stopped, Paul. You know, I mean, the sheep, the livestock was removed from the affected area on December the 6th, should I say, so fairly recently. Not because of the mutilations or the killings, simply because there were no nourishment in grass. I've got to be honest about that. But prior to that, probably a week, I don't have the date off the top of my head, probably a week before the last one was killed. And it's continued, I mean, throughout 2017, throughout 18. And I'm still in no position to say what I think's doing this, but I will say that this is no normal land-based UK predator. I mean, there's a pattern forming. I spoke about it last year. It sounds a bit graphic, I do realise, but whatever's doing it is stripping, in most cases, stripping the skin off the faces of these animals, removing the eyes. It looks like a hoover sucked the eye out because there's no trauma around the eye socket. Ears are removed. If a leg's removed, don't ask me why, listeners, but it's always a left leg.
That's absolutely bizarre.
It really is. I mean, I don't know if that's too graphic, Paul, but
no, it's okay.
You know, one of the last ones I found, it had its head and neck removed, clean around where it would attach on the breastbone. I don't know what you would call it on a sheep. But what was interesting is that if you pictured a paint roller, I'm trying to give listeners some kind of example that they can picture in their mind, all that was intact. It was like a fur tube down to the breastbone. And obviously internal organs were in there and everything. So this is no normal predator, because people have come back to me when I've done various talks and spoke about these things and saying, well, it's probably a UK predator, it's a badger or a fox. Well, unless they carry surgical scalpels to remove ears and things like that, excuse my sarcasm, but it's none of those things. Yes, the carcasses are getting predated on if they're left for a considerable length of time, but that's the reason I've been going up to these affected areas in between 4:30 and 5:30 all year. In conjunction with this, and I'm saying it, but I can't prove anything, these lights are being seen off this coast and around the area throughout this time period. And I've even received a historic account today. And as well as, I don't know, every sort of type of unexplained phenomena that you could think of seems to be exhibited and presenting in the area. And it's not made up or enhanced. It's actually there with witness accounts. Me and Christopher Turner earlier in the year, Chris came through. He's been through twice now. And the first time he came through, we did a bit of research and some all-night vigils, and we just sat in the area. And we got criticised for not when he put the film out, which he named the Bempton Phenomena. We got criticised for not showing the images, but we just weren't allowed. I don't know. I think it's just censoring of YouTube and things. But we do have the images, and in the next one that we're doing, that we're putting together, that will be different. All the images will be there. And I know that Tony, I think he was at the UFO conference, so I did show some of the images at the conference in the last talk that I did. But what's doing it, Paul, I really don't know. All I'm willing to say is it's not a UK-based predator.
Well, I was talking to my good lady about this morning, Paul, and trying to explain the nature of this phenomena, and she said, well, it's got to be a dog, or something similar to that. And I think the answer to that one came when I was watching your documentary earlier on today, when you went on to explain that this isn't just happening to sheep, but this is happening to sea creatures as well.
The harbour porpoises are such a strange one, because they're found well above the waterline, and they look absolutely pristine in most cases, apart from this monstrous hole beneath the jaws or around the jaw area. And we're not talking like a little hole. It just looks in 2 to 3 inch round hole through the jaw. And obviously there's no land-based mammal going to catch a harbour porpoise.
No, indeed.
But just briefly to stick with the livestock, what animal are we going to have that's going to catch a roe deer stag? And not only that, when it's caught there's no signs of trauma anywhere on the animal's body, apart from the area that has been impacted or has been targeted for the kill. You know, I find it. Well, I can understand people looking for logical explanation. A dog, but it's not a dog. The nature of a dog would be to bite and tear lumps and wear its victim down, and it doesn't really care where it grabs hold of it. This is precision stuff, and as I say, when you see the cuts on the ears, and when you see the incisions in the sides of these animals in some instances, you realise it's not a dog. But full respect to people who think that, but you'd have to see the images and actually.
Of course, no, and I've seen some of the images myself. You were good enough to send some to me. The roe deer stag, how tall is an animal like that?
Well, it'll stand 3 to 4 feet at the shoulder.
Okay, so it's got a fair old gallop on it when it gets going.
Yeah, now I would have thought, probably apart from a greyhound, I mean, I don't know the top speed of a greyhound, but I wouldn't have thought there's much in the UK that could actually catch one of these things.
I think I'm a bit of a movie buff, Paul, and when I think back to that very famous horror film, The American Werewolf in London, there's a scene in there where the guy involved in that, who's the werewolf, actually catches hold of a stag and rips it apart.
Right, yeah, well, you know, there's a story in the first book about a guy travelling home from a night shift at Bessingby Industrial Estate, which is on the outskirts of Bridlington, back to Flamborough. And I don't think we touched on it last time, but as he's approaching the dip in the road that just again Danes Dyke, he claims that he saw something, and he described it as looking like the American Werewolf in London as it transformed, as it was in the process of changing. I've no reason to disbelieve this man. I realise not everybody's going to be truthful, but the amount of people that come forward with these unusual stories. I mean, I have a few from Danes Dyke, you know, as it happens. And just recently a guy's contacted me, if you want to stay with this kind of theme, Paul.
Yeah, please do, yeah.
Yeah, a few years ago, him and some friends, I mean, I'd put this guy in his late 20s now, because they were teenagers stroke early 20s, and they were up in Danes Dyke having all-night camps. I think most young blokes have done things like that, take a few beers and do what they want to do. Got a fire going. About 2 a.m. in the morning, in the dyke, which is probably, 3 miles from where I'm sat now, they sort of having a look round, and they can see a tall figure in the distance watching them. And they thought that it was someone walking who probably thought there's a group of youths or young men there, and I better be careful because I don't want I don't want to intrude on them. Why anybody would be walking in this sort of dense, sort of remote woodland, I don't know. But they turned away. They looked again, and he still stood there. I'm calling it E. I don't really know. So they shouted out, no response. This guy and his friends walked a little bit closer. He said, I'm 6'3". He says, this thing was a lot taller than me. He says, we got to about 12 foot away from it, and we realised it's got no clothes on. And it's just a big, dark, shaggy outline of something. We don't know what it is. He says, and I, being a bit bolder, walked a little bit closer, and I still couldn't make out. He says, and we'd had an old shovel that we'd been scraping around just to form the fire area, and I banged it on the floor 3 times, and this thing just never moved. But it was solid. It wasn't some kind of apparition. He says, and we turned and ran. Now, the dike in various places drops down to about 40 to 50 feet at its deepest, but usually running the course, it's about 20 feet. He says, when we turned back, he said, I don't know if his friends saw it, he says, it jumped into the dike, down in, bearing in mind, if you, listeners, this dike at most times of year is just a little 2 to 3 inch stream. I mean, it gets a fair old roar on it if there's been heavy rains. So it wouldn't have drowned, but as he said, in the darkness, or even in daylight, nobody would actually attempt to jump into this thing. So what he saw is sort of up for debate, you know, and a lot of these stories come in. I mean, there's a guy that I call it Cases for 2019, and I've sort of spoke with him a few times, and he claims he's seen something in Danes Dyke once again, some strange creature with a dog-like face with glowing red eyes, looking at him from behind a tree. But the interesting part about it, he claims he saw a head and shoulders. The tree, looking at it from where he was about 12 inch thick. Obviously, the circumference would have been a lot more, but that's what he's looking about a 12 inch width. He said, but he couldn't see anything else. He should have been able to see the back and the other part of this animal, whatever it was that was looking at him. That's what's messed his head up more than the fear of seeing this unusual thing. So, you know, and all these stories keep pouring out of it's just quite a concentrated area. I mean, and I don't look for these people. They actually come to speak to me. And, you know, I received one this morning. I've been talking to Howard in preparation for going on The Unexplained. And I sent him the email this morning.
Right. And
this is UFO related. Do you want to briefly drop to this?
No, please. You carry on, Paul. It's not a problem at all.
Well, this is quite historic. It's 1980/81. Now, first of all, listeners, I need to describe the lay of the land. So we're talking about Bempton. A few miles up the coast, we've got Speeton, and then we run to Filey about 6 miles away, and Flamborough to the opposite side of Bempton, another 3 miles away. So this is at Speeton. In between that, there's a little holiday resort, and this man tells me that in 1980 to 1981, his family, himself, his mum and dad, went into a caravan at Reeton Holiday Sands, which is literally about a mile down the coast, not even that from Speeton. And he said his brother, who didn't go with them that year, who was 6 years older, he said his thing when he went on holiday was to go and light a fire on the beach on his own. He liked to do that. And he was 15 years old, and he begged his mum and dad if he could do the same thing, he says, and after much sort of nagging and pestering, they let him. And he went down the ravine at the side of a stream onto the beach at Reeton. He said, and he walked towards Speeton. Now, I do realise that listeners can't picture these areas. You'd have to Google them, but the cliffs at Speeton are sheer 400 feet cliffs. They're not scalable. It's absolutely sheer drop.
You wouldn't want to fall down those.
No, well, it's lights out if you fall down them, and you're not going to climb them. But he said that's where he settled and decided he was going to light this fire. It's about 11 p.m. and, excuse me, he said he noticed about 150 feet in the air, very close to the cliff face, a white luminous disc. He said it wasn't blindingly bright, but it was a large luminous disc. And what's interesting as well is this guy, this is 38 to 40 years old, this sighting. in the email, I'll send it you, Paul, because I sent it to Howard this morning.
Yeah, please do.
In the email, he said that he's never told anybody about this. He's not done that, and he's still holidays at Reeton. But he wanted to share it because he'd heard a few things about me looking into strange events around this area, and Reeton being his holiday destination. And this.
Paul, did he say why it took him so long to report it?
Yeah, incredible. But so he was looking at this disc. He said he didn't feel fear. So I'm just sort of a bit gobsmacked for. He only looked at it for a minute or so. He said it was the colour of the moonlight, or the colour of the moon, so it wasn't blindingly bright. The unusual thing, and he noted this in the email, was that it wasn't lighting up the cliff face, and it was very close to the cliff face. So after a minute or so, he realised it was moving towards him very slowly. So then he felt fear. He said he felt extreme fear and set off running. Dared to look behind him. It's still behind him, not on his shoulder or anything. I need to add, it was about a quarter of a mile away when he was looking at it. So I think the distance hadn't closed in, but it's still moving towards him. So the tide was out. The waves were small. It was a clear night. He's adamant it wasn't a helicopter. The point I'm making is there was no sound. He eventually stopped and hid behind a cliff. He said it was pointless trying to run up the ravine. He couldn't have, it's a fairly steep drop down from that area, and he said he'd have not made it before this thing approached. He said, and he stopped, caught his breath. When he looks round, this thing's gone. But that memory, that sighting has stayed with him for 38 to 40 years. And that's just an example of some of the things seen. Now, I can't say, Paul, not even with, I would say with any certainty, I can't say that the lights are responsible for any of the other strange happenings, or the spheres of orange light that have been seen and documented out at sea for all these years. But, who's to say there's not something structured behind these lights? I mean, we've seen them on land as well. I mean, there's a few stories that I've collected from different witnesses of a luminous mushroom-shaped light on the cliff tops that's created some kind of fear in everybody that's related seeing it. And I often wonder to myself, and I've said this before, what would be the reaction if anybody had to walk close to something like this? Just what is this luminous sphere that it's almost misty with lights punching about inside it, and it's quite large. It's been seen on the old RAF base. It's been seen on the cliff tops itself, on the cliff path. Three independent people spoke about this. So the amount of phenomena that's reported is incredible. I mean, this time last year, on December the 18th, Howard Hughes, as it happened, read out an email that had been sent to him, and it were relevant to me, because on the cliff tops where we try and observe these lights, I think it was December the 18th, a chap and two friends had gone for a walk. In the night, he said it was something that they did quite regular, and they'd walk towards Flamborough from the Bempton RSPB car park, and then they obviously make their way back and get to the car. And I'm not sure of the exact times here, Paul, off the top of my head, but I think it was approximately 8:30. There was a huge flash of light in the sky. Everything became daylight just for a blink. Now, I sort of chased this up a little bit, and via social media we were able to confirm the date, because people were saying, did anybody see that flash of light? That's the beauty of social media. It does have its uses at times, guys, doesn't it? But,
sometimes, yeah.
So we'd got that, and we knew that this guy was on the level with the flash of light that he'd seen, so we'll assume it's 8:30. And they didn't think anything more of it, apart from, wow, that was strange. They expected to hear a crack of thunder, but there was nothing, and they carried on their journey. They should have been back to the car just after 8:30. When they got back to the car, they'd lost an hour and a half of time. I haven't got the times written down in front of me, guys, so I do apologise for that, but the top and bottom is they'd lost 1.5 hours of time, and they can't account for it. I've exchanged several emails with this man since, because Howard were kind enough to pass the information on to me, and I've contacted him, and he's really puzzled, because this guy, reading between the lines, is a total sceptic.
Interesting.
And why not, if that's how he feels, but this has really thrown a curveball for this chap.
Skeptics often make the best witnesses, Paul, I think.
Because
they're not out looking for it, are they?
Well, that's correct. But, I mean, just in this, 15, 20 minutes, we've got these animal mutilations, we've got the spheres of light, we've got this historic sighting from 1980, we've got the missing time element, and it's all in this concentrated area. Now,
I do wonder, Paul, whether there's anything geographic, because you think about certainly the area that you're in, Bridlington, down to, is it Spurnhead? Is it
Spurn Point?
Spurn Point, right. It seems to me it's like the British version of Brown Mountain in North Carolina. You've got the Brown Mountain lights, you have the lights where you are at Bridlington, and it seems to be very consistent.
That's correct.
That's something that stuck me. What I'm going to do, Paul, if you don't mind holding on the line, we're going to take a quick break and go grab yourself a cup of tea, and we'll come back afterwards, if that's
Excellent.
all right.
Yeah, that works.
Okay, hold for me, and I'll speak to you very shortly.
Listening to the Fright Before Christmas with Gledders on HCR104fm.
It is the Fright Before Christmas, HCR104fm, 28 minutes before 8 o'clock, Saturday, the 22nd of December. On the phone from his home in Bridlington is Paul Sinclair. Hello, Paul, are you still there?
I'm still here, yeah.
Did you have a nice cup of tea?
Yes, everything's going good. Doing good. So
I've been at the Pepsi Max. Right, where were we?
We were just talking about a few new cases that I'll be looking at, but seeing as we're on the Fright Before Christmas, you wanted to talk about the cryptids, I believe, earlier.
I love a cryptid. Go on.
Well, probably the most... Are we ready to go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Probably the most famous cryptid in the UK, or something that's never been identified but has been reported for many, many years, going back hundreds of years, is probably the Flixton werewolf. And I'm fortunate to live about 10 miles away, it's 11 miles away as the crow flies from Flixton. And it's a story that never ever stops giving. I keep getting different witnesses and people reporting this thing, present day, not just historic sightings. And I'd like to tell you about a few of them, if that's possible.
I'd be very interested, Paul. Just for those of us who don't know the area that well, places like Danesdyke, Flixton, places like Speeton and Sproatley, how close to each other are they?
Danesdyke and Speeton are a few miles apart. Speeton and Danesdyke are probably 10 or 11 miles as the crow flies from Flixton.
Right.
Sproatley's 24 miles down the coast. Oh, and let's not forget that this week and last week, jets were scrambled to intercept an object seen over Hull, which is literally 25 miles away, 30 miles away.
And that in itself was a very strange story, and hopefully we'll have time to come back to that one, but I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, that's fine.
But let's pop back to the Flixton werewolf for now.
Yeah, well, I think we've got to include these not latest, almost a year old, some of these reports to me, as part of the Flixton story. And the first one, it comes from a place called Foxholes. That's the original name of this tiny little... did I really say tiny little? Of this village.
You did, but it's even worse that I didn't pick up on it.
Yeah, 6 miles away from Flixton. And this is January 2018. That's as specific as I can be. I've spoken to this man at length. He's driving home from Scarborough to Hull. He's got a very, very high-profile job. He's absolutely adamant that I don't use his name, and he writes for a few... he writes articles, and the people that he writes for would be absolutely amazed, in his words, if they knew that he claimed that he'd seen a werewolf.
Well, employers often don't know what their employees are up to. And
well, this is true, but
witness.
The nature of what he's writing for, nature is the word, shall we say that. So he's driving a Jaguar car from Scarborough to Hull, and he's approaching Foxholes. Anybody who wants to Google this area, and it's approximately 9 to 9:30 at night, and there's a bit of moonlight, and it's been raining, so everything's a bit shiny. He's driving along, 50 miles an hour, approximately, and he just realises that his peripheral vision catches something in the driver's side door, the glass, and he turns and looks, and he claims that there's a huge, monstrous-sized dog running alongside, looking at him as it's running. So the car headlights are facing out 6 to 8 feet away. This thing's managing to pace his car at 50 mile an hour, this guy claims. This creature's looking in at him. He said it had glowing yellow eyes. Now, I threw a few questions at him, such as its head size. Would it be as big as a mastiff or a bear's? And he said its head would have been as big as a grizzly bear's. And its face wasn't touching the glass, but it filled the area of the glass. And as it's moving, he claims it looked like it had the mane of a lion. And very dark in colour. It's an incredible story that this guy related, and you could feel the sort of nerves in his voice as he's telling me, because I had to chase him quite a bit to get the story out of him. It came from a friend at first that had seen it, that he'd related it to, and then I sort of badgered until I actually got to the horse's mouth. He said it had teeth hanging down from its upper jaw. That's the only teeth he saw, that were as big as his thumbs. So it's quite an incredible sighting, and obviously it's up high. I don't know the height. I don't even know that's what I should have asked, what make and model of Jaguar it was. Now, he said that he eventually increased his speed. Obviously, this thing was pacing him. It could have been pacing him for, 10, 15 seconds before he actually saw it. But he was absolutely terrified by what he'd seen. And when he stepped up the pace of the car, he believes that he lost it at 60 miles an hour. But he could see it stood in the road, the silhouette of it stood in the road through his mirror as he's driving away. He's even wouldn't say changed his route, but he's changed his pattern or his times that he goes home now, because it's unnerved him that much. And, like in his words, and he was quite well spoken, he says, I've seen a bloody werewolf. And I've actually noted it is 5 miles from Flixton. So I think it's got to be added into the Flixton stories. We're in very close proximity. And then another story that came out from about 6 miles from Flixton is from a place called Towthorpe, I don't even know if you'd call Towthorpe a village. There's next to nothing there. It's very remote. And this guy but real name Jason, this is in February 2018, so the times are very, very close. And he was illegally metal detecting. I don't know if anybody knows anything about this. I think they call them night hawks. I might have got it wrong. But they sort of find an area, and if it's productive, if there's artifacts to be found, they go on a night, because they're not going to get permission to detect for whatever it is they're looking for.
I can't imagine that there's a shortage of things to find. I mean, that part of England has got an awful lot of history to it, from the Vikings and various other people who visited.
Well, that's true, Paul. And just to jump from that briefly, what you find as well is around these areas, which I've not coined the term, it's an old term, of high strangeness, there's lots of burial mounds and earthworks. So that, to me, sort of signifies that early man probably found these areas of great importance. I mean, and they might have placed even more importance on the incredible, wonderful things that they saw manifesting and appearing in the skies than we would now, because everybody walks about with their head glued to an iPad or a telephone, and we're just detached from the real world, I think, whereas they'd have been a little bit more in tune with it. I'm not saying that's why they placed their burial mounds there, but obviously their locations, their places, their items of importance just happen to be in these areas of high strangeness, which is interesting in itself, So, jumping back to Jason, he's pulled his 4x4 truck up off the road, and there's a strip of woodland. He says a narrow strip of wood that accompanies the side of this field where he's going to do his metal detecting. He must have thought it were quite lucrative. I think they do a bit of searching on Google Earth, and they can see potential sites. So he's set up and he gets up there. But what was interesting, he told me he owns, and he still does, a Caucasian Shepherd. This huge dog. Well, I weren't familiar with one when he was telling me about it.
I've not heard of one of those either.
No, well, I had a look at it, and it's just like a giant Alsatian on steroids. It's a monstrous dogs. And he claims they are the ultimate guard dogs. I mean, there will be people out there listening who'll dispute that. I don't know, but I don't think I'd like to tangle with it. And he would sort of stressing and emphasising that this dog fears nothing. This dog, it will tackle anything, this Caucasian Shepherd. So there's himself, the metal detector, and the dog in the field at the side of this wood, and he's just walking along slowly, and he became aware of something in the wood, making growling sounds and sounds that he weren't familiar with. And he says, I used to live at Langtoft. That's what he told me. Well, Langtoft's very close. He says, and I've spent years with my metal detector in fields in the night, and I've heard deer barking, I've heard badgers grunting and grumbling. He says, I don't know what this was. It was heavy, and it was quite sort of heavy on its feet. And as I'm walking along with the metal detector, this thing is in the wood. I won't say at the side of me, but sort of pacing me. He says, but unusually, the dog stayed at my side. He said, and believe me, he says, this dog, I mean, I know I'm bigging this dog up, but that's what he was doing to me. He says, it would have been in them woods. He says, I just didn't understand it. He said, but I found 2 hammered silver coins. Now, I don't know what hammered silver coins are, but he seemed quite animated that he'd found these hammered silver coins. Said, so, we sort of made his way back to the truck, and that was that night over. I was a little bit unsettled by whatever was in the wood. But either the following night or a few nights after, he went again. This time, the sounds and the breaking of branches and the growls were more animated, and he said it was a guttural type growl that he was hearing. He says, and I just made the dog go in. So get in there, and he sort of forced his dog to go in. He says the dog started squealing and yelping. There were a load of commotion. The dog came out, tail between its legs. In his words, the dog was crying. He said, I've never, ever seen my dog so frightened. And I met this guy at Carnaby, actually, while he was having his vehicle repaired, and we sat and talked outside at an outside cafe, and he's showing me his arms, and he's saying, look at hairs on my arms, look at it, and all on my back. He says, I'm never going there again. So he never actually saw anything. They did a runner. They got to the vehicle. He's told me where it is. He's said, he'd tell anybody where these coins can be found, but he's never, ever going back there again. So just an unusual story that is quite close in time-wise, I should say, to the Foxholes one, and location. So these stories have never gone away from, Flixton, Caton, Bempton, and I have quite an unusual one from Caton, if we've time to relate this one, Paul.
We absolutely have, please do.
Yeah, well, this one's going to be... We've got the actual man on film in the documentary that me and Chris Turner are making called Bringing Down the Light. He's kindly agreed, and we sort of set up cameras, and he's given us this story. They call him Lee, and he still lives in Caton. And he was coming home from an equity meeting in Hull. He says, and he was travelling home through Hummunby towards the Flixton and Caton cars. Now, I'll explain what these words that I'm talking about in a moment. I say Hummunby deliberately because the Hunmanby, if you look back in time, is called Hundmanby. Hundman, Houndman, meaning farmstead of the Houndman. These aren't things that I've made up. These are all documented words. So then from Hummunby is approaching Flixton and Falkton with the stories of the Flixton werewolf that goes down onto what's called the Cars. The Flixton and Caton Cars is the dried-up lake bed of Lake Flixton, which is just now lush, fertile ground. It needs drainage. There's lots of drainage ditches in it, but 11,000 years ago, just after the Ice Age, I think it's Paleolithic. It was a monstrous lake, huge lake, and these stories have come through time. Well, anyway, he's crossing the Cars in his car. Cars, as in C-A-R-R-S, meaning reeds and elder. It's just wetland. And he's in his motor vehicle, and he gets towards Caton at the other side, about a mile across, and he turns onto a place called West Garth. And a major house builder had just started building at the side of this big field that ran alongside of the cars. So we can date that, and it was 2011 because I found out when they started building them, and they were at footing stage, these houses. They'd just been dug out, and they were putting the footings in. Now, when you turn onto West Garth, you drive for approximately 3/4 of a mile, and then there's some bungalows that would be about 15 to 20 years old, so they're not historic properties. And something caught his eye coming out of the side of one of the bungalows, or down the side of one of the bungalows. He said, and in one giant leap, this thing, whatever it was, jumped from the side of the bungalow to the front of the garden. He said, and he'd got his wife with him. I mean, his wife sat in the room when we filmed them, and she didn't want to go on film, but she backed up his story. He said, I can't believe what I was looking at. He said, there's this long creature that's all wrong. He says everything about it, its bone structure was all wrong. He said, I only saw it momentarily as it jumped and stopped for a second, and then it jumped again, and it was landed in the middle of the road in front of the car. He estimated it to be between 7 and 8 foot tall if it had have stood on its hind legs, because it was on all fours, it just in these giant leaps. He said, but its arms were over long. Its upper arms, the bone to the elbow was a lot longer than it should have been. It was grey in colour, and he doesn't know if it had fur. He says if it did, it would have been very, very tight, short-cropped fur. He says, but it wasn't emaciated, but it was absolutely sinuous. You could see all the muscle in this thing. The legs looked wrong. The legs looked back to front, I think that's what he said. He said, although its feet were facing the right way. And I asked him if he could describe its head, because I called it the Kate. I was going to call the story the Caton Werewolf. And he said, I would describe it as looking more like a demon. He said, if you pictured a goat's head but without horns, he says, this is what this thing would have looked like. He said, but the speed of it was just incredible. So what we've got to realise is whatever this was, it had been in somebody's back garden. And he caught sight of it, and in one leap it was at the front of the garden, in another leap it was in the middle of the road. As I say, and we have got this man relating the story in the documentary, which is brilliant, because it's not just my words relating someone else's story. That was the whole point of doing the documentary, getting different witnesses to actually sit in front of a camera and relate what I'm usually telling people. He said, I don't know, it's momentarily stopped so he could get a view of it, and then a huge leap, and it's over, and it's off into that field between the houses where the new houses were being built and the rest of it. Now, I don't know what you make of that. I asked him if he'd seen anything like it before. And he asked me, and I haven't seen this, Paul, so you may have done. He says, had I seen the film Harry Potter 3? He said, it looked the same shape as, and I'm reading from what I've wrote down, it looked the same shape as the man who changes into the werewolf in that film.
Okay, yeah.
But a different colour. So, an incredible sighting, 2011, not far from where I'm sat now. I mean, are all these people, liars? Because, I'm relating the stories, and luckily we've got him on camera telling the story. We've got quite a lot of other people giving us their accounts, and I just find it quite incredible. And incidentally, that same field, earlier this year, a lady called Christine contacted me. She's got some friends who own a farm in Hunmanby who purchased my books, and we've since got talking because they'd had a few experiences up at the farm. And she'd told the farmers that she'd seen a big cat. And they said, well, you must contact Paul, he'll be interested in this.
Yeah.
So that's what she did, and I met her at the field where this guy claims he'd seen this Caton demon, as we've called it. And this was no demon that she'd seen. This was a daylight sighting. I realise I'm jumping from the cryptid to the cat, but she says she's walking a dog along the West Garth towards the bungalows. Nice, normal kind of day, nothing untoward. She said, and I noticed this shiny black cat over in the distance in the field. She says, but it was huge. She says, like, it was large dog size, and it got this big tail that sort of loped down and curled up as it sort of hit the ground midpoint and curled up. She said, and then it got on its belly, this thing, and began to crawl across the field. Now, the unusual thing that she said is it was crawling towards the new houses. Now, it's just a daylight sighting. I mean, Christine was kind enough to let me record her and film her telling me the story. But it's another example of a strange animal scene that shouldn't belong, Paul, you know?
Yeah, I do, and I've got a few questions about it, Paul, as well, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, please, fire away.
So the first thing that I've been looking, while you've been telling us this, I've been looking at Google Earth to try and get my head around the area. Now, Flixton is next to the village of Staxton. Is that where there was an RAF base as well, Staxton Wold?
It is. Well, what you've got up there, you've got Staxton and Flixton are practically joined at the hip, if you know what I mean. There'd still be a small village if you joined them. And you're correct, Staxton Wold is still operational. It's the oldest operational RAF base in the world.
Yeah.
And that's built on an old Roman hill fort. And an interesting side note to that is that the refuge that was built to protect travellers in ancient times, this is what the text says, from an infestation of savage beasts, lest they be devoured, was at Spittal Corner at Staxton. Now, I've been to the Spittal Inn now. It was called Carmen's Spittal in 937 A.D.
Crikey.
So you see, we're going back a long way, and I've been to the Spittal Inn and sat down speaking to the then owners and looked at their deeds for the property. They were kind enough to show me. And I've actually seen writings on the deeds that back up what these old texts say. But what was interesting, what Sandra told me when we were sat talking, and I don't know why she said it, but because I didn't pursue it, I was interested in the stories of the Flixton werewolf. She said to me, she looked up onto Flixton Wold, which is literally just across the road from, it rises 500 foot above sea level, steep woodland, and at the top of Flixton Wold and Staxton Wold is the RAF base. She said, there's Bigfoot up in them woods. And
there you have it again with this, the cryptids, that there does seem to be so much here that it can't be coincidence, Paul. I mentioned the RAF base because earlier on we were talking about events at Bempton. There was an RAF base there, which was the original radar station, which didn't work out too well for the Air Force, and they had to create Staxton Wold as a result. I think I've got that right. Okay, well, you know, Staxton Wold was there before RAF Bempton. I believe Staxton Wold came in 1937. Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
I could be wrong, I mean, and I don't mind being wrong, honestly. And RAF Bempton arrived at Flamborough originally in 1940, and in the same year it moved further up the coast because of the higher elevation. I think the cliffs at Bempton are about 300 feet.
No, my mistake, that's what I was thinking of, Paul. But they were all part of the chain home radar.
Spot on, that's correct, yeah.
Okay.
And you know, Bempton at two stages in its operational life was an experimental radar station as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what that signifies. I know it was involved with Operation Winkle, which...
As you do, yeah.
I think that's not Twinkle, the one with the green fireballs that was in America.
Mm.
This is the Operation Winkle. But I don't know tons about it, so I'm not going to pretend that I do. But... yeah, we've got these RAF bases, and we've got this strange activity at RAF Bempton, funnily enough.
Indeed,
when it closed in 68-72, in the mid-70s to the mid-90s, intermittently it was used by a satanic cult.
Yes, it was. And I think, because it's very difficult to get access to Bempton, the underground part now, isn't it?
Oh, good God. I wouldn't recommend anybody, and I need to stress this because the people of Bempton would be bane for my blood if I advised anybody to go up there. I mean, by all means, get up onto the cliff tops, get to Speeton, get to Flamborough, look at these places we're talking about, but please don't try and go on the old former RAF base because the landowner is not happy about people going on the base. And besides that, the underground facility has concrete bison beams over the stairwell with a huge water tank.
Yeah, you wouldn't want one of those on your head.
Well, the point is it's a forklift job to remove them and get down there.
Mm. Paul, sorry to stop you there. We've literally got a minute and a half left to go now before we head up towards the news. You've written 2 books.
That's correct, yeah.
And you've been in a documentary as well. Tell us about the books, Paul. Where can we get them from?
The books are available on Amazon. Anybody who wants to search for them, just type in Truth Proof into your search engine. You won't have to look far. I think they'll just come straight up. You can also purchase them via PayPal from a blog that I've got. I wouldn't call it a website because I'm social media. Oh, it's just terrible. So that is truthproof.webs.com. And, basically, read reviews, see what you think, and let me know if you buy one and you enjoy it, or you've got some stories to tell.
I've got both books, Paul. I love them. I like the way that you write them. You're not only a very good and thorough, meticulous investigator, but you are a cracking teller of stories as well. And everybody I know who's spoken to you in the past and knows you says exactly the same thing, is that you have a way of telling stories. And, I think there's, I know that there's an awful lot that's going on in that area, and I'm sure we'll have you on again, Paul, if you'll be so minded.
Oh, it'd be a pleasure. And just briefly, I know you've got to go. The third book's out early this year, Truth Proof 3, Bringing Down the Light.
Fantastic. And that's going to be, did you say that there was going to be a documentary going along with that as well?
There is. Myself and Christopher Turner are doing the documentary, which we've titled Bringing Down the Light. We've thrown everything at it: thermal cameras, Geiger counters. We've hit the area with everything. Simply, if we don't get no results, we don't get the results, but nobody can say that we haven't give it a go,
Okay, Paul, thanks ever so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Look after yourself, mate, and we'll talk to you soon, okay?
Yeah, have a good Christmas.
And you, buddy. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.